Joining us from Toronto. Great to have you with us. I asked to get you on the show. You're here, so thank you for taking the time. What do you think, Desmond?
Hi, Todd, and thanks for having me on. I think we should keep in perspective that Mark Saunders was only extended for 1 year last year and was set to leave anyway. So I know people are going to read a lot into this, but I mean, he was going to leave, and I think what we should really focus on is the fact that Mark Saunders made $414,000 last year. That's about twice as much money as the mayor of the city of Toronto makes. So in the eyes of the state, Mark Saunders is so much more important as a person than the average worker that he gets put on this huge pedestal. He makes all of this money, and we act as if he's making these huge decisions about policing in our city. I don't know if the average Torontonian, Todd, knows what Mark Saunders does to make $414,000 last year, but I think we can survive without him. And I heard you and your last guest talking about defunding and abolition. I'd like to talk about that with you too. We could do a lot better things with Mark Saunders' salary than find somebody else to give $414,000 to. Mark Saunders came into the city after Bill Blair, who terrorized Black people in the city through carding, who oversaw the abuses of the police of the G20, and who is now the public safety minister. So you know what? Mark Saunders is going to be fine. He'll find another job if he wants one. He's served this city and this state for a long time, and I'm sure they trust him. But I think we can do better things with Mark Saunders' salary, and I bet that the police can survive without even replacing him. We don't know what he does, except be a spokesperson for the police, and we're acting like this is a huge day in the history of Toronto policing. There will be another Mark Saunders.
Does this send any kind of message in light of what's happening around the world, or there too, are we reading too much into this?
I think, okay, so if you want my 5 seconds after hearing this, like everybody else, feelings about it, Todd, I believe that the city wants to now signal that it is hearing us. What did Mark Saunders do this weekend? Knelt down on the ground. Knelt down in the ground. We don't know why, because that doesn't really have anything to do with the job that Mark Saunders oversees. But there's a lot of efforts right now to make symbolic gestures to Black people and to others who are demonstrating against police violence to make us believe that we're being heard. But Todd, we don't need gestures. And even appointing Mark Saunders as a Black police chief was supposed to be a gesture to our community. But on day one, Mark Saunders said he supports carding, and Mark Saunders continued to defend and oversee that practice. Mark Saunders covered up the investigation into what happened about Defund Miller. I mean, we haven't heard what Mark Saunders is going to leave, and it'll be, if he leaves in July, it'll actually be 4 years since Defund was 3 years, since that case came out into the public, and almost 4 since he was attacked. We've not heard one word from Toronto Police Chief Mark Saunders or anybody in our force about what happened to Defund, whose attackers are now on court. So I just feel like he hasn't overseen a particularly proud legacy of policing in the city of Toronto, but there's so much focus on him as a celebrity. And remember, again, his salary. He's supposed to be this very pivotal figure. Who appointed Mark Saunders? John Tory did. Who's still going to be the mayor of Toronto after July? John Tory. Who gets to appoint the next police chief? John Tory. Who gets to decide what that police chief's budget is going to be? The person who sits on the 7-person board and leads city council, that's John Tory. So Mark Saunders can go, but the ideology of cuts to public services while funding $1 billion in policing, that's not Mark Saunders, it's John Tory.
Let me ask you about the $1 billion for the police budget. There are conversations going on, you're part of it, over whether it's time to rethink police, reform police, take some of that money away. Be realistic with me. You know the Toronto Police. You know how politics work in the city of Toronto. You know how powerful the police union can be. Is that all theater? Is something actually going to happen? Will anybody sort of, quote, take on the police and try to reform how they operate?
Many of us have been taking them on for years, Todd. You and I have been having these conversations a good few years now. People in communities across this city have been taking on the police. They have organized against police violence from Jane and Finch to Regent Park, to Lawrence Heights, where 4 young men were held at gunpoint by police many years ago. People have been fighting back. I hope what's happening in this moment is that the media is realizing that its responsibility is not necessarily to amplify what Mark Saunders is doing, but to amplify the voices of those people who are actually fighting back and to give them more of the share of the conversation. As far as that $1 billion budget, that $1 billion budget is happening for the police in a city where people don't have food programs, where people don't have childcare, where we don't have enough public transit to move people around. That budget is the public's money. It's our money. We should be deciding what happens with it. And the decision that we're making is to give $1 billion, more than other services combined, to an enforcement agency that is hurting, surveilling, stalking, and killing particularly Black and Indigenous people. We can do better than that, Todd. And the response that we need, so what does everybody say? They say, well, what happens if somebody's robbing a store? What will you do without police? 99 times out of 100, the police are not there when the person robs the store. They're there afterwards with their guns and their body armor and their weaponry. But when they're talking to a person walking the streets, they're also wearing that weaponry as if they're going to war. The police walk around our communities like they're at war with us. And we fund that, but we don't have enough for the basics. We don't have enough when people need mental health supports to provide them. But when they have a crisis, we call the police. We don't have enough for people in this community to have housing. But when somebody in their little apartment plays their music till late, who do we call? The guys with the guns. This is how we're running a city. Is that realistic? People say cutting the police budget or defunding the police and revamping what they do completely is unrealistic. Is this world where we don't have enough to eat, but we have stormtroopers running through our city talking to little kids in playgrounds? That's realistic? I don't want to live in that world anymore, Todd. And many of us don't want to live in it. So we have to get real about the hell people expect us to keep living if they don't want to change anything. Some of us are fed up.